The rain fell in sheets that morning, cold, relentless, and unmerciful. It washed over the city streets, over gleaming cars, and umbrellas rushing by, but in one quiet corner of a public park, it painted a scene so heartbreaking that it would change one man's life forever. There, under the gnarled roots of a massive oak tree, an old woman sat alone, her frail frame trembling from the chill. Her faded floral dress clung to her skin, soaked through, and her beige cardigan sagged heavy with rainwater. In her lap rested a white styrofoam container filled with rice and beans, the only warmth she had left. With trembling hands, she lifted a spoonful to her lips, her tears mixing with the rain. Across the field, a man in a dark navy suit stood frozen. He had been walking briskly toward his car after a failed business meeting when he spotted her, that sight stopping him mid-step. Something about the old woman's fragility, the quiet pain etched on her face, pierced through the armor of his success. He raised a hand to his forehead, shielding his eyes from the rain, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Why was someone so old, so broken, eating alone in such misery? The world, it seemed, had no mercy left. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of a single moment to change a heart, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Stories like this remind us that even the richest lives can be the emptiest when love is lost. The man's name was Ethan Grant, a self-made millionaire who had built an empire from nothing. From street vendor to CEO, his journey had been ruthless, a climb paved with sleepless nights and sacrifices that had turned him into the very thing he once despised, cold, proud, and unreachable. The world saw him as an inspiration, but beneath the expensive suit and commanding voice was a man haunted by a hollow space that no amount of money could fill. He rarely visited his hometown anymore. It carried memories he preferred buried, memories of poverty, hunger, and a woman whose face he'd long tried to forget. But fate, as it often does, has a cruel sense of timing. As Ethan stared through the curtain of rain, that face began to look achingly familiar. The way the old woman's trembling hand held the spoon, the way she bowed her head before eating, as if whispering a silent prayer of gratitude even for the smallest meal, it all felt too personal, too close. His breath caught. He took a step forward, then another, his expensive shoes sinking into the mud. The closer he came, the louder the rain seemed to fall, as though the heavens themselves were trying to drown out his disbelief. When he was finally close enough to see her face clearly, his heart clenched so violently he thought it might stop. The wrinkles, the silver hair, the weary eyes, they were older, sadder, but unmistakable. It was Margaret, his mother. The woman he hadn't seen in over 20 years. For a moment, the world spun. He stumbled back, his throat tightening as flashes of his childhood struck him like lightning, her gentle voice telling him bedtime stories, her hands mending his torn shoes, her laughter echoing through their small home even when they had nothing. And then, just as vivid, the memory of that one fateful night, the fight, the words he could never take back. "You're the reason I'll never have a future," he had shouted before storming out at 17, determined to escape the poverty she'd tried so hard to shield him from. He had promised never to return, and he hadn't. Now, here she was, not in a warm home surrounded by family, but in the rain, eating from a discarded takeout box. Ethan's chest heaved as guilt and disbelief fought inside him. He dropped to his knees before her, uncaring of the mud soaking through his suit. His voice trembled, though no sound came out at first. Margaret looked up, startled, her eyes cloudy but still sharp enough to recognize the shape of his face. She froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. For a second, it was as if time stopped. The rain softened into a background whisper. He wanted to speak, to say, "Mom," to say, "I'm sorry," to ask, "Why?" But no words came. Only tears. The man who had faced boardrooms of power and conquered everything the world had thrown at him now wept like a child, his face buried in his hands. Margaret reached out a trembling hand and placed it on his shoulder, her touch gentle despite her frailty. She didn't scold him, didn't ask why it took so long. She simply said softly, "You finally came home." Ethan helped her to her feet, his hands shaking as he took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. He guided her to his car, shielding her from the rain as if making up for every year he hadn't been there to protect her. Inside, she shivered quietly, her hands clutching the food container like it was the last piece of dignity she owned. He wanted to ask how she had ended up like this, but part of him already knew. She had probably spent her life working menial jobs, too proud to seek help, too forgiving to hate the son who had abandoned her. The drive back to the city was silent except for the rhythmic hum of rain against glass. Every red light, every turn brought back another memory of her sacrifices. He remembered her skipping meals so he could eat, selling her wedding ring to buy him textbooks, and working long hours as a cleaner just to keep their tiny home standing. Every memory stabbed deeper until he could barely breathe. He took her to his penthouse, a world of marble, gold, and glass, but none of it mattered. She sat there quietly, her wet clothes leaving small puddles on the polished floor, and he realized how meaningless all his success was without her presence. That night, he made her a promise, not the kind that fades with emotion, but one carved in the soul. He would give her comfort, care, and love for however many days remained. And more importantly, he would live differently, with humility, compassion, and gratitude. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. Margaret woke in a soft bed, wrapped in warm blankets, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Ethan stood by the window, watching her, his eyes red but peaceful. He knew he could never undo the past, but he could rewrite the ending. He would dedicate his life to helping others like her, mothers forgotten, hearts broken, lives lost to time. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Every act of kindness brings light into someone's darkest hour. And before you hear how this story ends, I want you to comment below, what would you do if life gave you one last chance to make things right with someone you once lost? As the weeks turned to months, Ethan's world transformed. He sold part of his company to fund shelters for the elderly, naming the first one Margaret's Haven. There, every person who walked through the doors was greeted with warmth, food, and dignity, things his mother had once gone without. The press called him a changed man, but Ethan didn't do it for headlines. He did it for the sound of his mother's laughter filling his home once again. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from his garden, Margaret placed her hand over his. "You've done well, my son," she whispered. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered back, "No, Mom, you did." The rain that once witnessed their pain now seemed to fall only to cleanse their hearts. And so, beneath the same sky where he had once found her broken, Ethan finally understood, wealth could build empires, but only love could rebuild a soul.